Hey Void, so third one in for today, so already on pace to get ahead of the curve, strike early, and keep my reviews flowing in for the month, and see how many we can get through in October alone. Well, I was not prepared for this one though. Now, this is a movie I have seen referenced countless times upon the horror subreddits. It usually comes up with being referred to as a wild ride and among the highly recommended haunted house films. So it kind of has always been on my radar, and I'd always been a little curious. But I had never had access. This year, I've got more options than before. When I first did the whole, I'm going to do a bunch of movies I've been meaning to see. At that time, I pretty much had Netflix, Shudder, and I was just dipping my toes into Tubi, so just a little bit there. Last year, I just shifted constantly between Shudder, Tubi, and Netflix, so same ones, but more of a focus since I was more familiar with some of them, such as Tubi at that point. Now, this time, I also have HBO Max. So I'm able to look up a few things that I hadn't had a chance to look into before. Now, there is a lot of overlap on plenty of these streaming services, but each one usually has a few titles that the others don't. And this one had House. Now, I have reviewed a movie called House before. That was, I think, actually back in my first year of doing this. I think I watched the original House in October during that period because while I had seen House 2, I had not seen that one. But no, this is different. Trying to see what year the original House came out. The House I reviewed before. Let's see which one of these came first. Okay, House came out in 1985. This is actually an earlier film from Japan, also referred to as Hausu. So, most of the titles still throw up a house for it, so I'll be referring that to it throughout the video. But it is different than the American haunted house acid trip. This is its own haunted house acid trip. And I will say, I was not prepared for this movie. It was weird. I'm not saying it was bad, but it was weird. So, essentially this film makes heavy use of special effects, and they seem to have given the editor a caffeine pill because a lot of the transitions and After Effects are wild with how many there are. This thing... Artsy doesn't even begin to cover this. This isn't artsy in the style of like high art paint than paintbrush and art critics. This is someone dumped a box of crayons out and went crazy. But I mean that in a good way. House came out in 1977 and was largely unavailable and unheard of outside of Japan until like 2009. But when it kind of popped up on some random multi-collection, and then after that it kind of took off as a cult hit. And now it's kind of pretty well regarded on its own. It's actually entered into the Criterion Collection of all things. That said, this is weird. So, at surface, it's pretty basic. A Japanese high school girl and her 6 friends are going to stay with their aunt for the summer. And her aunt happens to live in a haunted house and may be a undead person who feeds on young unmarried women to maintain her youth. So, there's that. But again, this movie is weird. The effects are constant and all over the place. Took me a second first because all the characters are actually referred to by a nickname for the main girls, which took me a second because the 2 main ones are Gorgeous and Fantasy, because one's pretty much then Gorgeous is always spending time in the mirror and doing her makeup, and Fantasy is constantly either daydreaming or otherwise imagining things. Then you add in Kung Fu, Sweet, Professor, and Melody, and Mac, short for stomach. And there you have our group of highly enthusiastic girls running around a haunted house. So, that does not begin to describe the weirdness of this film, and I don't even think I can sum that up. There's a lot of dismembered body parts flying around, waterfalls of blood, the piano that eats someone, and a lot of random cartoon effects, and a clapping skeleton that appears in the background of many scenes. And it gets surreal, and it gets weird. I'm not even sure who this movie is for or aimed at. I mean, it's not rated. I mean, it does have the energy as if something that was done for kids or families. Like, it's not very scary, and the characters definitely seem to be aimed more towards that. It seems like a kids' movie thing. But the blood isn't very realistic, and there's not too, and like it's just mostly doesn't look very realistic. There is kind of a lot of it, and there's also a fair amount of nudity in this film, so I'm not even sure who this is really aimed at. And from what I saw, the director actually had a lot of input from his 10-year-old kid, so this was actually co-written pretty much by a 10-year-old. House has to, is like Mad God, House has to kind of just be experienced. There's no way to go on about it. However, Mad God was definitely a more of deep and heavy, and you can only watch once in a while. House is a lot more lighthearted. It has to be seen to be understood, but it is just wild. And the characters, they're not very strong characters, but with how much energy they bring and how the relationships are going, they're not annoying either. You do kind of root for the kids. Apparently, none of the kids were actually actors. They had done some modeling work, but for the most part, the teen girls were not practice actors, and they actually do pretty well despite that. It's silly. It's very energetic. I'd put this more as a comedy horror than actual horror, but I did like it. I did. It was seeing what was going to come flying at the screen next. I was curious. I can't say I properly understood a lot of what was going on in the latter parts, but I do think I got like the main premise of what was happening. Why the guy turned into bananas, I don't know, but minor nitpick. Anyway, House. I'm gonna give this one 7 MacGuffins just because it was hypnotizing and it was fun. That was another thing, kind of like The Giant Claw, which I kind of went a little lighter on. This movie also was fun. It was entertaining. I liked the experience of watching it, and that I will say, Mad God, I liked the experience of like seeing it and staring at it, but it was one of those that it was the tone and makes it less enjoyable is not the right term, but it's depressing. This one is weird but light, so it kind of adds something. It's not taking itself seriously, and with how over the top it's going for effects, they're having fun. They claim this is one of the earliest films to use a lot of those effects, particularly like some of the wipes and transitions, but I don't know if that's entirely true. But yeah, I do recommend House. But again, it's one of those you have to be ready for. I was not ready, but for me, that's kind of that's with how many movies I have seen, that's kind of a selling point. Okay, so yeah, I'll give House 7 MacGuffins. I don't know how often I return to this one, but I do want a copy for my collection. Alrighty, all for now. See you guys soon. I'm not sure how many more I'm going to get in today. one, maybe two. We'll see. But, yeah, keep rolling and striking while the iron's hot. So, this one is number 3 for the month. Again, I think I'm going to kind of do a bit of a rating system like I did last year. So, at least since I'm doing more than 30, I'll at least give the top 5 of each. Well, figure that out later. See ya.